James felt a chill run down his spine when he walked into the room and saw Sarah on the phone, her face illuminated only by the light from the display. Trying to make as little noise as possible, he approached and heard the words that would change his life forever. "I'm pregnant, but it's from my lover." James' heart raced, a mixture of anger and disbelief taking over his body. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Sarah didn't see him, but he was watching her, his gaze fixed and icy. James' mind was working overtime, Sarah's words echoing like a mantra. How could she do this? And now, what should he do? Betrayal was a bitter poison, but the revelation of her lover's pregnancy was a mortal blow. James knew this was the last straw. He took a deep breath, his decision made. Revenge would be cold, meticulous. He would emerge from that situation not as a victim, but as the executor of his own justice. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and he was ready to act. James Harrison was a respected and successful middle-aged man, a businessman known in Chicago for his ability to turn failing businesses into success stories. He has always had an enviable sense of discipline and focus, qualities that have taken him to the top. His wife, Sarah, was the opposite, young, vibrant and full of life. They met at a charity party, and since then, their lives have intertwined in a seemingly perfect way. Sarah had a radiant beauty and charm that captivated everyone around her, making her the center of attention at any social event. The Harrison home reflected their status and good taste. Located in an upscale neighborhood of Chicago, it was a 3-story mansion, with large windows that offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan. The interior was decorated with a combination of classic and modern, full of artwork and elegant furniture. Everything there exuded wealth and sophistication, but hid an emotional emptiness that few knew about. James spent long hours at the office, immersed in meetings and contracts. His work was his life, and he believed he was building a strong future for himself and Sarah. However, this distanced him from his wife, who increasingly felt the loneliness of a marriage based on appearances. She began to seek solace at parties and social gatherings, where her bright smile hid the pain of a life without true love. Sarah, on the other hand, enjoyed life to the fullest. She was a regular at the city's most exclusive events, always surrounded by friends and admirers. His presence was required at gala dinners, art exhibitions and charity parties. Despite her busy social life, she maintained a facade of a devoted wife, participating in social obligations alongside James when necessary. The couple's friends saw them as an example of success and happiness, but they didn't know about the lonely nights that Sarah spent, nor the endless days of work that consumed James. They didn't see the growing gulf between them, hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life. The emotional distance that separated them was fertile ground for secrets and betrayals. Among his closest friends was David, James's best friend since college. He was a renowned lawyer, always present at the Harrisons' meetings and celebrations. David knew James better than anyone, but even he didn't understand what was going on behind the scenes of that marriage. Sarah and David had a cordial relationship, but there was always an unspoken tension when they were together. She knew David could be a problem if anything came to light. However, there was someone closer to Sarah than anyone else, Rachel, her best friend since she was a teenager. They shared secrets and confidences that no other friend knew. Rachel was an independent and free-spirited woman, always encouraging Sarah to pursue her happiness, no matter the cost. She did not approve of Sarah's marriage to James, thinking that her friend deserved something more than a life of convenience. At the office, James had a loyal ally, his assistant, Tom. Tom was young, ambitious, and viewed James as a mentor. He knew the importance of his role and always made sure everything was in order so James could focus on his larger goals. Tom admired James' dedication and work ethic, but often wondered if the personal sacrifice was worth it. He saw the wear and tear on James, although the businessman never showed weakness. The Harrisons' daily routine followed a well-established pattern. James left for work early and returned late, exhausted, but always trying to set aside time to talk to Sarah, even though the conversations were superficial and brief. Sarah, in turn, spent her days at spas, gyms and social events, trying to fill the emptiness she felt. At night, she would wait for James to arrive, but he was often too tired for any meaningful interaction. The marriage was trapped in a cycle of coldness and distance, a game of appearances that both played masterfully. Sarah felt increasingly suffocated, yearning for a life that wasn't just about luxury and status. She wanted passion, adventure and, above all, to feel truly loved. It was in this context that she found comfort in another man, someone who promised to give her everything she missed in her marriage. James, despite his unwavering focus on work, was beginning to notice changes in Sarah. He noticed the forced smiles, the emotional absence. Something was wrong, but he didn't know exactly what. In his mind, he convinced himself that it was just a phase, that it would soon pass. He loved Sarah, even if he didn't know how to express it properly. His way of showing love was to ensure that she lacked nothing, financially or socially. However, betrayal is a shadow that slowly grows, until the moment it can no longer be ignored. And for James, that moment was about to arrive. He was about to discover that the world he had built with so much effort was, in fact, a fragile illusion, about to crumble under the weight of secrets and lies. And when that happened, revenge would be his only answer. James couldn't get Sarah's words out of his head that fateful night. He acted normally, but his mind was in constant turmoil. Determined to find out more, he hired a private detective, Mike Reynolds, a discreet and effective man who would begin to investigate Sarah's life without arousing suspicion. While Mike did his job, James pretended to be normal. He knew that any mistake could alert Sarah and jeopardize his plans. The weeks passed and James maintained his strict routine while Mike sent him regular updates. The discoveries were devastating. Sarah was involved with a man named Richard, a supposed investor that James had never heard of. Richard was charming, manipulative and, by all appearances, deeply involved with Sarah. Mike investigated further and revealed that Richard was not who he said he was. He had a history of scams and was interested in Sarah's money. The fake pregnancy was a ploy to ensure Sarah pressured James for a substantial financial settlement. Richard's ultimate goal was to empty the couple's accounts and disappear with Sarah and all the money. James felt anger bubbling up inside him, but he maintained the facade. He needed a meticulous plan, something that would expose Richard and make Sarah realize the extent of her betrayal. He planned everything down to the smallest detail, with the help of Mike, who now also monitored Richard closely. The tension between James and Sarah increased every day. She noticed the growing distance and the coldness in her husband's eyes, but attributed it to the stress of work. Richard, for his part, was impatient. He pressured Sarah to move forward with the plan, and she, increasingly divided, began to question whether that was really what she wanted. James began to put together his revenge plan, knowing that patience would be his greatest ally. He began discreetly moving large sums of money into secure accounts, out of Sarah's reach. He also began recording all of his interactions with her, seeking to create a detailed dossier that he could use in the future. Meanwhile, Sarah and Richard planned their escape. They wanted to wait for the perfect moment to act, a social event where they could announce their pregnancy and pressure James into providing a large sum of money to secure the baby's future. They didn't know that their every move was being watched. One night, Sarah was especially nervous. She had received a message from Richard, urging her to put pressure on James. They needed the money soon. Sarah, feeling the pressure, decided to confront James, using the pregnancy as an emotional weapon. She didn't expect her husband's cold and calculated reaction. James, without showing emotion, agreed to give the money necessary to guarantee his son's future. He knew this would speed up their plans and bring everything to a head. From that moment on, James began to execute the second phase of his plan. He convinced Sarah to organize a big event at home, a charity dinner that would bring together close friends and business partners. It would be the perfect occasion for Sarah and Richard to try to make their announcement and deliver the final blow. On the day of the event, the mansion was stunning. Well-dressed guests, soft music and a sophisticated atmosphere. Sarah was beaming, although nervous. Richard was present, disguised as a guest, waiting for the opportune moment. James moved among the guests, maintaining a facade of normality, but with each movement calculated. As the night reached its peak, Sarah stood up to give a speech. She thanked everyone for coming, praised her husband's support and, with a smile that hid her true intentions, announced her pregnancy. The guests applauded and congratulated the couple, but James just watched. He knew the next step was crucial. James stood up and took the floor. He thanked everyone for coming and, with an enigmatic smile, asked them to stay for a special announcement. He signaled to Mike, who was disguised among the guests. Mike began displaying images and videos on a large screen that revealed Richard's true nature and his plan with Sarah. The guests gasped, and Sarah turned pale, not knowing how to react. James remained calm as the revelations continued. He exposed Richard's false record, his frauds, and the plan to steal his money. Sarah tried to intervene, but her words were drowned out by the shocked murmurs of the guests. Richard tried to escape, but was quickly detained by security guards hired by James. Sarah's humiliation was complete. She stood there, in front of everyone, watching her world fall apart. James didn't feel sorry. He just watched, knowing his revenge was just beginning. He had not only exposed the betrayal, but also ensured that Sarah and Richard would face the legal consequences of their actions. The event ended in controlled chaos, with guests leaving slowly, muttering about the scandal. Sarah, alone in the center of the room, realized the extent of her betrayal and the devastating consequences it would bring. James approached her, his gaze cold and calculated. He said nothing, but his silence was more deafening than any words. The event of exposing the secrets brought quick and severe consequences. The next day, the Harrison mansion was silent. Sarah, devastated, isolated herself in the guest room, away from James' accusing eyes. He, in turn, was in the office, reviewing documents detailing the financial transactions that Sarah had tried to manipulate. That morning, Mike brought new information. Richard is not just a scammer. He is involved with a network of criminals who launder money. The fake pregnancy was just the beginning of their plan. If you hadn't acted, they could have walked away with a fortune. James listened in silence, absorbing every word. "Do we have enough evidence to bring them to justice?" he asked, looking directly at Mike. "Yes, we do. But it will be a long and complicated process. We need to be meticulous." James nodded, thanking Mike for his impeccable work. Now, he had to confront Sarah and decide his next move. He walked up the stairs slowly, feeling the weight of the situation. When he opened the door to the guest room, he found Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, looking lost. "Sarah, we need to talk," James said, his voice firm but controlled. Sarah raised her head, her eyes red from crying. "James, I don't know what to say. I made a terrible choice, I was manipulated." James interrupted, raising his hand. "Don't give me excuses, Sarah. Not only did you betray my trust, but you also tried to ruin my life. I want to know why. What made you do this?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "I was unhappy, James. I felt alone, helpless. Richard showed up and made me feel alive again. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I was desperate." James stared at her, his eyes cold. "Desperate enough to fake a pregnancy and steal my money? It's not just about the betrayal, Sarah. It's about the premeditation, the cruelty of your plan." Sarah started crying again, but James was unmoved. "Richard is not just a scammer, he is involved with criminals. Did you know that?" Sarah shook her head in surprise. "No, I didn't know. He told me he was an investor, that he had connections. I believed him. James sighed, rubbing his forehead. That doesn't change the fact that you tried to destroy me. Now, we have to deal with the consequences. Mike has enough evidence to prosecute them, but it's going to be a difficult road. Sarah looked at James, sadness in her eyes. What are you going to do to me? James was silent for a moment, reflecting. You will cooperate with the investigation. You will help expose Richard and his accomplices. After that, you are out of my life. I cannot forgive what you did, Sarah. But we can prevent others from being deceived. Sarah nodded, resigned. She knew she had lost everything. James left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. He headed to the office again, where Mike was waiting for him. We need to ensure all evidence is secure. Richard and his network need to be dismantled. Mike agreed, already preparing for the next phase. We're one step ahead of them, James. We're going to get justice. The following days were a race against time. Sarah cooperated with the investigation, providing information about Richard and his operations. James, for his part, maintained the facade of normalcy while moving pieces behind the scenes to ensure every detail was handled with precision. One night, while reviewing documents in the office, James received an unexpected call. It was Richard. James, can we talk? Said the voice on the other side, full of falsehood. I have nothing to talk to you about, Richard. Your game is over, James replied coldly. Richard laughed, a sound that made James grip the phone tightly. You're a smart man, James. You know this doesn't end so easily. I have information that could destroy you too. Let's make a deal. James felt anger bubble up, but he remained calm. What kind of deal? Let me walk away with some of the money, and I'll disappear. Sarah can have you. She never meant anything to me, just a tool. James controlled himself not to explode. I'll think about your case, Richard. But know that I already have all the evidence against you. Try something and it will be worse for you. When he hung up, James knew he needed to speed up his plans. Richard was desperate, and that made him even more dangerous. He called Mike and explained the situation. Richard is trying to negotiate. We have to act quickly. Mike agreed, fine-tuning the final details of the plan. We're going to lay it all out tomorrow at a press conference. We're going to make sure he has nowhere to run. The next day, the Harrison mansion was full of reporters and cameras. James was prepared to make the announcement that would change everything. He took the makeshift stage in the main hall and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Today, we will expose a network of crimes and fraud that has targeted our family. The man known as Richard is not who he says he is. He is a scammer involved in criminal activities, and was trying to use my wife to destroy me financially. The reporters were stunned as James continued. We will present all the evidence to the police and make sure he pays for his crimes. I want everyone to know the truth. Richard, watching the broadcast from a safe location, realized his time was running out. He made one last desperate effort, trying to contact Sarah. Sarah, we need to escape now. James is destroying us. Sarah, however, was determined to cooperate with James. No, Richard. It's over. You manipulated me, used me. Now, I'm going to help James end you. Richard screamed in frustration, but he knew he had no other options. He tried to flee but was intercepted by law enforcement officers who were waiting for him. Within minutes, Richard was handcuffed and taken to prison, his network dismantled. Back at the mansion, James felt a mix of relief and sadness. He had managed to expose the truth and secure justice, but the price had been high. Sarah was emotionally destroyed, and he knew the trust between them would never be restored. The press outcry continued for days after the press conference. James became a central figure in the news, being praised for his courage in exposing such a complex scheme. Meanwhile, the Harrison mansion was plunged into a tense silence. Sarah spent her days locked in her room, avoiding any interaction, while James dealt with the legal and financial consequences of exposure. With Richard arrested and the criminal network dismantled, authorities began working to recover the embezzled funds. James, although relieved at Richard's arrest, knew his life would never be the same. He had dedicated years to his marriage and building an empire, only to discover that everything could be destroyed by betrayal. At the office, James received an unexpected visitor. David, his longtime friend, appeared with a worried look on his face. "James, how are you handling all of this?" he asked, sitting down in front of the table. James sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm keeping up the facade, David. But inside, everything is chaos. Sarah, she was an important part of my life, even with everything that happened." David nodded, understanding the weight of James' words. "Now, what do you plan to do? About Sarah and everything that happened?" James was silent for a moment, reflecting. "I still don't know for sure. Part of me wants to forgive her, try to rebuild something. But another part knows that I can never trust her in the same way again. Maybe it's best if we go our separate ways." David placed his hand on James' shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I will be here to support you. And remember, you are a strong man. You went through this and came out victorious. Don't let this experience define who you are." Meanwhile, Sarah has finally decided to come out of her isolation. She knew she needed to stand up to James and take responsibility for her actions. She found him in the office, where he seemed lost in thought. "James, can we talk?" James looked up, his eyes revealing the exhaustion and pain that had built up over the past few weeks. "Of course, Sarah. Sit down." Sarah walked over and sat down in an armchair, her hands shaking. "I know there are no words that can justify what I did. I was selfish, weak, and allowed Richard to manipulate me. But I want you to know that I am willing to accept the consequences and do whatever it takes to repair the damage." James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. "Sarah, it's not just about repairing the damage. It's about the trust that was broken, the betrayal that can never be forgotten. I loved you and gave my all to this marriage. And you almost destroyed it all for an illusion." Sarah lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. "I know, James. I know I messed up irreparably. But I want a chance to redeem myself, to prove that I can be different." James watched Sarah's vulnerability, feeling a pang of compassion. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah. Not now. Maybe, in time, we can find a way to move on. But for now, we need distance. You must get out of here, find a place to reflect, and rebuild." Sarah nodded, understanding James' decision. "I understand. I'm leaving. But please know that no matter what happens, I have always truly loved you." James didn't respond, just watched as Sarah got up and left the office. He knew that this separation was necessary so that they could both find a new path. With Sarah out of the mansion, James dedicated himself even more to his work, trying to fill the void that the betrayal had left. He knew the revenge had been effective, but the emotional toll was high. The support of friends like David and Mike's efficiency were essential in keeping him focused. The days passed slowly, and the routine began to bring a feeling of normality. James began to realize that, despite the pain, there was an opportunity for a fresh start. He decided to seek counseling, trying to better understand his own emotions and find a way to move forward without the weight of bitterness. Sarah, in turn, found a small apartment in the city. She began working at a charitable organization, trying to rediscover her purpose and deal with the consequences of her actions. Loneliness and guilt were constant companions, but she was determined to change, to become a better person. James and Sarah were on parallel journeys of rebuilding. Both knew that the future was uncertain, but the experience had left deep marks that would guide them in their future decisions. The final confrontation was yet to come, and would be decisive in determining the course of their lives. Months have passed since the separation. James felt like he was starting to rebuild his life. Therapy helped him deal with emotional scars and find new purpose. He dedicated himself even more to philanthropic work, investing in social projects for poor communities in Chicago. His success as an entrepreneur now had a deeper purpose, helping others overcome their adversities. One night, after a long day at work, James received an unexpected call from Mike. "James, we need to talk. I found something you need to see." They met in Mike's office, where he presented new documents. Richard has got a powerful lawyer and is trying to strike a deal to reduce his sentence. He is willing to hand over compromising information about Sarah and other accomplices. James felt a knot in his stomach. What does this mean for Sarah? Mike looked straight at him. If this information is true, Sarah could face serious charges. We need to act quickly to understand the full extent of this. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her journey of redemption. Working at the charity organization, she found new meaning in her life. The people she helped gave her the strength to carry on, but the shadow of her past actions still hung over her. She knew that, at some point, she would have to face the legal and emotional consequences of her actions. James decided to confront Sarah about the new revelations. He found her in her apartment, where the atmosphere was simple but welcoming. "Sarah, we need to talk. New information about Richard has come to light. He's trying to make a deal and may implicate you in more serious crimes." Sarah went pale, but her resolve didn't waver. "James, I didn't know the true extent of Richard's activities. If necessary, I am ready to face the consequences. I don't want to run away anymore." James admired her courage, but knew the road would be difficult. "Let's find a lawyer who can help you. I'm not going to let you face this alone, despite everything that's happened. It's time to face the truth." Richard's trial was a media spectacle, and Sarah was called as a witness. During the process, painful truths were revealed. Sarah admitted her initial involvement, but it became clear that she had also been a victim of Richard's manipulations. The court found his actions to be the result of coercion and emotional manipulation, mitigating his criminal responsibilities. Richard, however, was not so lucky. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He was sentenced to a long prison term, thus ending his reign of manipulation and fraud. Justice was served, but the emotional cost for everyone involved was high. With the trial over, James and Sarah met one last time, this time to close the painful chapter of their lives once and for all. "Sarah, I want you to know that despite everything, I want you to find peace and a new beginning. We both deserve to move on." Sarah smiled sadly. "Thank you, James. I also wish you the best. I learned a lot from my mistakes and I want to use this experience to do good. Who knows, maybe one day we can meet again under better circumstances." They said goodbye with a hug, a gesture of closure and mutual respect. James knew he still had a long way to go, but he felt stronger and more resilient. He had faced betrayal, revenge, and finally justice, emerging with a new perspective on life. Sarah continued her charity work, turning her pain into empathy and support for those in need. The experience shaped her into a more conscious and determined person to make a difference. James, in turn, rediscovered the joy in the little things. He rebuilt his social circle, surrounding himself with people who really mattered. He found a new love, someone who understood and supported him, without the ghosts of the past. And so, James and Sarah's story, marked by betrayal, revenge and redemption, came to an end. Each followed their path, transformed by the experiences that shaped them, ready to face the future with new hopes and dreams.